Chapter 34. We stopped talking and got to thinking, and by Tom says, "Looky here, Huck. What fools we are not to think of it before. Bet I know where Jim is." "No. Where?" says I. "In that hut down by the ash hopper. Well, looky here. When we was at dinner, didn't you see a slave man go in there with some victuals?" "Well, yes." "What did you think the victuals was for?" "For a dog." "Well, so did I. But, well, it wasn't for a dog, now was it?" "Why?" "Because part of it was watermelon." "So it was, and I noticed it." "Well, it does beat all that I never thought about a dog not eating watermelon. It shows how a body can see and don't see all at the same time." "Well, the slave unlocked the padlock when he went in, and he locked it up again when he came out. He fetched Uncle a key up about the same time we got up from the table. Same key, I'll bet. Watermelon shows man. Lock shows prisoner. And it ain't likely there's two prisoners on a little such plantation as this. And where's the people all so kind and good? Jim's the prisoner." "All right. I'm glad we found it out detective fashion. I wouldn't give shucks for any other way. Now you work out your mind and study out a plan to steal Jim, and I'll study one out too. And we'll take the best one we like." What a head for just a boy to have. If I had Tom Sawyer's head, I wouldn't trade it off to be a duke, nor mate of a steamboat, nor clown of a circus, nor nothing I can think of. I went to thinking about a plan, only just to be doing something. I knowed very well where the right plan was going to come from. Pretty soon Tom says, "Ready?" "Yes," I said. "All right, bring it out." "My plan is," I says, "we can easy find out if Jim's in there. Then get up my canoe tomorrow night and fetch my raft over from the island. Then, the first dark night that comes, steal a key out from the old man's britches after he goes to bed, and shove off down the river on the raft with Jim, hiding out daytimes, running nights, the way me and Jim used to before. Wouldn't that plan work?" "Work? Well, certainly it'd work, like rats fighting. But it's too blamed simple. There ain't nothing to it," says Tom. "What's the good of a plan and ain't no more trouble than that? It's as mild as goose milk. Why, Huck, it wouldn't make no more talk than breaking into a soap factory." I never said nothing, because I weren't expecting nothing different. But I knowed mighty well that whenever he got his plan ready, it wouldn't have none of them objections to it. And it didn't. He told me what it was, and I see in a minute it was worth about 15 of mine for style. It would make Jim just as free as a man as mine would, and maybe get us all killed besides. So I was satisfied, and said we would waltz in on it. And I needn't tell that. So I was satisfied, and said we would waltz in on it. I needn't tell what it was here, 'cause I knowed it wouldn't stay that way, not for very long. I knowed he'd be rearranging and changing every which way as we went along, and heaving in new businesses and bullinesses wherever he got a chance. And that is what he done. Well, one thing was dead sure, and that was that Tom Sawyer was in earnest, and was actually going to help steal that slave out of slavery. And that was the thing that was too many for me. Here was a boy that was respectable and well brung up, and had a character to lose, and folks at home that had characters, and he was bright, and not leather-headed, and knowing, and not ignorant, and not mean, but kind. And yet here he was, without any more pride or rightness or feeling than to stoop to this business, and make himself a shame, and his family a shame, before everybody. I couldn't understand it no way at all. It was outrageous, and I knowed I ought to just up and tell him so, and so be his true friend, and let him quit the right thing, where he was, and save himself. And I did start to tell him. But he shut me up and says, "Don't you reckon I know what I'm about? Don't I generally know what I'm about?" "Well, yes." "Didn't I say I was going to help you steal the slave?" "Well, yes." "Well, then?" And that's all he said. And that's all I said. It weren't no more use to say any more, because when he said he'd do a thing, he always done it. But I couldn't make out nohow how he was willing to go into this thing with me. So I just let it go, and never bothered no more about it. If he was bound to have it so, well, I couldn't help it. When we got home, the house was still all dark and still. So we went on down to the hut by the ash hopper to examine it. We went through the yard so as to see what the hounds would do. And they knowed us, and didn't make no more noise than country dogs is always going to do when anything comes by at night. When we got to the cabin, we took a look at the front and the two sides, and on the side that I weren't acquainted with, which was the north side, we found a square window hole, up tolerable high, with just one stout board nailed across it. And I said, "Here's the ticket. Hole's big enough for Jim to get through if we wrench off the board." And Tom says, "Why, it's simple as tit-tat-toe. 3 in a row, and easy as playing hooky." "I should hope we can find a way that's a little more complicated than that, Huck." "Well, then," I says, "how'll we do to saw him out, the way I done before I was murdered that time?" "Well, that's more like," he says. "It's real mysterious and troublesome and good," he says. "But I bet we can find a way that's twice as long. There ain't no hurry. Let's keep on looking around." Betwixt the hut and the fence, on the back side, was a lean-to that joined the hut at the eaves, and that was made out of plank. It was as long as the hut, but narrow, only about 6 foot wide. The door to it was at the south end, and it was padlocked. And Tom, he went to the soap kettle and searched around and fetched back the iron thing they lifted the lid with. So he took it and prized out one of the staples, and the chain fell down, and we opened the door and went in, and shut it, struck a match. And see, the shed was only built against the cabin, had no connection with it, and there weren't no floor to the shed, nor nothing in it but some old rusty played-out hoes and spades and picks and a crippled plow. And the match went out, and so did we, and shoved in the staple again. The door was locked as good as ever, and Tom was joyful, and he says, "Now we're all right. We'll dig him out. It'll take about a week." And then we started for the house, and I went in the back door. You only have to pull a buckskin latch string. They don't fasten the doors, but that weren't romantic enough for Tom Sawyer. No way would do him but he must climb up the lightning rod. But after he got about halfway up 3 times and misfired and failed every time, the last time most busted his brains out, he thought he'd got to give it up. But after he was rested, he allowed he'd give her one more turn for luck, and this time he made the trip. In the morning, we was up at the break of day, and down to the slave cabins to pet with the dogs and make friends with the slaves that fed Jim, if it was Jim that was being fed. And the slaves was just getting through their breakfast and starting out for the fields. And Jim's slave was piling up a tin pan with bread and meat and things, and whilst the others was leaving, the key come from the house. Well, this slave had a good-natured, chuckle-headed face, and his wool was all tied up in little bunches with thread. That was to keep the witches off. He said the witches was pestering him awful these nights, making him see all kinds of strange things, and hear all kinds of strange words and noises, and he didn't believe he was ever witched so long before in his life. He got so worked up and got to running on so about his trouble, he forgot all about what he'd been going to do. So Tom says, "What's the vittles for? Going to feed the dogs?" Well, the slave kind of smiled around gradually all over his face, like when you heave a brickbat in a mud puddle, and he says, "Yes, Mars Sid, a dog. Curious dog, too. Does you want to go and look at him?" "Well, yes." I hunched Tom and whispers, "You going? Right in here in the daybreak? That weren't the plan. Well, no, Huck, it weren't the plan. But it's the plan now. So, drat him, we went along. I didn't like it much. When we got in there, we could hardly see anything. It was so dark. But Jim was there, sure enough, and could see us. And he sings out, "Why, Huck! And good land, ain't that Mr. Tom?" I just knowed how it would be. I just expected it. I didn't know nothing to do. But if I had, I couldn't have done it. Because that slave busted and says, "Why, gracious to sakes, does he know you, gentlemen?" We could see pretty well now. And Tom, he looked at the slave, steady, kind of wondering, and says, "Does who know us?" "Why, this here runaway slave." "I don't reckon he does, but what put that in your head?" "What put it in there? Didn't he just this minute sing out like he knowed you?" Well, Tom says in a puzzled up kind of way, "Well, that's mighty curious. Who sung out? When did he sing out? What did he sing out?" And turns to me perfectly calm and says, "Did you hear anybody sing out?" Of course, there weren't nothing to be said but the one thing, so I says it. "No, I ain't heard nobody say nothing." And then he turns to Jim and looks him over like he never seen him before and says, "Did you sing out?" "No, sir," says Jim. "I ain't said nothing, sir." "Not a word?" "No, sir, I ain't said a word." "Did you ever see us before?" "No, sir, not as I knows on." So then Tom turns to the slave, which is looking wild and distressed, and says kind of severe, "What do you reckon's the matter with you, anyway? What made you think somebody sung out?" "Oh, it's the dad blame witches, sir, and I wisht I was dead, I do. Dey's always at it, sir, and dey's most gonna kill me. Dey scares me so. Please don't tell nobody about it, sir, or old Mars Silas he'll scold me. Case he say dey ain't no witches. And I just wish to goodness that he was here now, and then what would he say? I just bet he couldn't find no way to get around it this time. But it's always just so, and people that saw it stay saw it. They won't look into the nothing to find out if it's true or if they've done about themselves. And when you find it out and you tell them about it, they don't believe you." Tom give him a dime, said we wouldn't tell nobody, and told him to buy some more wool thread to tie up his other wool with, and then he looks at Jim and says, "I wonder if Uncle Silas is going to hang this slave. If I was to catch a slave that was ungrateful enough to run away, I wouldn't give him up. I'd hang him." And whilst the slave stepped to the door to look at the dime and bite it to see if it was good, he whispers to Jim and says, "Don't ever let on to know us. If you hear any digging going on at nights, it's us, and we're going to set you free." Jim only had time to grab us by the hand and squeeze it, and then the other slave came back, and we said we'd come again if the slave wanted us to, and he said he would, more particular if it was dark, because the widges went for him mostly in the dark, and it was good to have folks around then.